Support comes from St. Louis Public Library Foundation, helping the library serve children and their families with programs and services needed to become lifelong readers. More information about the foundation is at slpl.org.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. The next governor of Missouri will be Mike Kehoe. The current Republican lieutenant governor won a competitive GOP primary. He then went on to defeat Democrat Crystal Quade this week with almost 60% of the vote. STLPR political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum caught up with the governor-elect yesterday in Jefferson City to discuss Kehoe's plans for Missouri.
You have talked a lot about your first major priority is crime prevention. And we've talked before about how you want to reestablish having a gubernatorially appointed board oversee the City of St. Louis Police Department. Why do you think that's going to make a discernible difference in bringing down crime there?
Well, it seemed to have worked better before. I think that's the luxury we have in that option is that the city specifically was over that for, decades. And we saw a different result. And it also kind of takes the partisan piece of politics out of the police department. Public safety should never really be partisan. It should be about what's best for citizens. And I believe that model seems to work better. Many people in the business community in St. Louis that are the folks that want to invest capital to expand specifically to downtown St. Louis think that's a better option. The mayor obviously does not. I've talked to her about that, and I respect her opinion. But we need to figure out a way to move forward to increase the safety in the region and the perception, quite honestly, to potential investors and their employees and customers that St. Louis is open for a business. It's a safe place, and it's a place we want to continue to be a shining star for our state.
I know that putting forth specific policy templates is a little treacherous. I learned that from talking with Governor Parson over the years when I'm like, well, why don't you do it this way? And he's like, well, I need to see the bill language before I commit to that. And I think you've done that a couple times. But one of the alternatives to having like a gubernatorially dominated board oversee the St. Louis Police Department is what they do in St. Louis County, where there's a board of police commissioners that the county executive appoints. I'm not saying it takes politics completely out of the management of the police department, but it does create a buffer. Is that a possible way to have a middle ground to that maybe even Mayor Jones would agree to?
Listen, anybody who knows me knows that we're going to try to find the best solution that can get as many people on board as possible. The police, specifically the FOP, the cops in St. Louis are very important to me, so their opinion is what matters as we look at other options. But certainly if there's something that still protects our men and women and gives them the resources that we can get more people on board, it's something I would look at.
I've talked with you before about the Children's Division. You came on the Politically Speaking Hour in St. Louis on the Air and said you want to increase pay for Children's Division employees. But I also want to talk about the management of Children's Division, because when I talk with Republican lawmakers like Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman, soon to be former Representative Hannah Kelly, they don't disagree that the workers need to be paid better, but they had real concerns over how the Children's Division was managed. And there's no better example that I saw of a report showing that children died of fentanyl poisoning, and Children's Division investigators knew that their parents had fentanyl. So what are going to be some things you're going to be looking for in a new Children's Division director, because Director Missy left and you're going to get to appoint as a replacement? And how do you make sure that not only there's the right funding for the Children's Division, but there's also accountability to prevent some really horrible situations from occurring?
Well, look, it's a critical role, as you saw. And by the way, I thought Judge Missy did a good job, but we now have an opportunity to make sure that we put somebody in there that understands the roles and responsibilities. It's hard to find the right person that fits there. You need to make sure that all the pieces are in the puzzle. There's several lawmakers that I'll rely on heavily as we move forward in that decision process. Senator Cindy O'Laughlin, who I believe will be the first female pro tem in the Missouri Senate, is very passionate about this issue, as well as other lawmakers. You mentioned Mary Elizabeth Coleman and others, that we will take into account what it takes, along with actually the advocacy people, to make sure that we have the right he or she running that division. And it's a big role, and it's one that is a top priority for us to figure out a right path for.
Just to reiterate, I understand that the budgetary situation is not going to be as robust as the Parson years, but you are committed to paying employees significantly more money. Is that fair to say? And explain why that's important.
It's important because you want to get the best people in those spots, and they may be some of the ones that are there, but if you are not compensating for a very important area of the state, a very important part of our workforce, you may not get the best people that are qualified to do that job. And we want to make sure the compensation matches our expectations, and our expectations are excellent.
Why do you think Amendment 3 passed on Tuesday?
I think most people thought it was probably less than it actually was. I think the average Missourian looked into it and said, this is a amendment that would allow women to have an abortion, which it certainly was. But I don't think people really understood the extreme nature that I believe Amendment 3 took us to. And if for instance, the opponents, our proponents for that, kept saying it was all about women's health, and the word woman was not even mentioned in the amendment. So I'm not sure that the way it was kind of sold and marketed on TV, the yes vote, really brought the entire piece of what that amendment will all do.
Is it also, because I've seen a lot of postmortem on Amendment 3 about how the pro side had more money, how the anti-side wasn't as well organized, the anti-side saying, well, the pro side said things about the law that they feel is not true. But there hasn't been any acknowledgement that maybe Missouri's abortion ban, which had no exceptions for rape or incest, had a 0-week window when Donald Trump said that Florida's 6-week window was too short, was too much for voters. Is there any acknowledgement that maybe Missouri Republicans went too far in 2019? Well,
listen, one of the things I will tell you is that we were definitely outspent. When you get $31 million of money largely from outside of the state, I would say 90 to 95% of that from outstate interest, it's pretty hard to overcome that message. I have said all along, since we were in the primary and in the general, I am similar to President Trump and Senator Hawley that I believe we should have some exceptions. And if the legislature now takes this as a sign and just develops and crafts something that they send to us that includes the health of the mother and rape and incest, I would sure take a look at it.
Now, there has been some expectations that the legislature is going to put something else on the ballot in 2026. This is not a statute. You can't just overturn it. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure if they can agree on what to put on in 2026. But I think there are also people who voted for Amendment 3 who are like, we made our voices clear on this. It's going to work its way through court. Some of the abortion restrictions are probably going to be struck down. Let's move on to something else. What do you say to those people?
We're 48 hours since the vote was published, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of conversation about what can be done both from a legal standpoint or can't be done from a legal standpoint, and what options the legislature will have before them, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it as it moves forward.
One of the things you're probably going to have to deal with right away, Chiefs, Royals, maybe the Cardinals asking for stuff. I'm sure that was an issue you were just thrilled to talk about during the campaign. How much of your time you think will be based making sure the Chiefs and the Royals stay here, or that the Cardinals get something?
Well, a significant amount of my time is going to be spent on economic development, whether that's on which part of the state it's on, the St. Louis side, Springfield, rural Missouri and Kansas City area certainly. And the Chiefs and Royals conversation I really look at as an economic development conversation. It'd be no different if GM plant in Wentzville said, we're moving somewhere else because of ABC was offered to us. We'd want to do everything we can to keep that plant there. Pick any company you can. The Chiefs and Royals are organizations that have a significant impact on our economy, not only in their employment of the people they employ, but on the ripple impact of the economy. For instance, the stadium that the Chiefs play in, it is used primarily outside of football season for major venues, major concerts. Those are economic impacts
Taylor
that we
Swift.
Have. Well, Taylor Swift would be one of them.
Did you go to that concert, by the way?
I did not go to that concert. There's somebody on my staff that's very interested in going, and probably all 3 of my girls, to be honest with you. But my point is that the stadiums have a significant impact outside of the specific venue that they host for whatever their professional sport is. And I've said very publicly, I'm not in favor of taxpayer dollars going to build a stadium, but I am in favor of looking at what tools we have in the toolbox that remain a good investment for Missouri, a good return on investment for Missourians that would keep the Chiefs and Royals here.
One last question. WNBA has actually been talked about in St. Louis and Kansas City. Do you think there'll be any state help there, or is that going to be like up to the private?
Yeah, that's a fun conversation, by the way, because I think it's an exciting conversation.
I'm excited.
Have a WNBA.
I love professional basketball.
And as you know, in Kansas City, the very first women's totally dedicated athletic complex was built in the world for the Kansas City Current for the women's soccer team. So Missouri has caught the attention of some of these women's pro sports team. Again, I think that's more of a private group of people that are get put together. That's not a appropriate taxpayer resource at all. But private entities will look at that and see what the business case is.
That was Republican Governor-elect Mike Kehoe in conversation with St. Louis Public Radio political correspondent Jason Rosenbaum.
Today's episode was produced by Jason Rosenbaum.
Our audio engineer is Aaron Dorr. This podcast was mixed and edited by Aaron.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.